Hoping you can hear me okay. So we've got some slides that should be coming up in a second. While that's happening, I'm just really excited to be here this afternoon, sharing about the joys and pains of multicultural Britain, and I'm even more excited that I'm doing it with my good friend and colleague Rob Neal, who I'll call to say a few words himself. Before I go further, I have to give a massive shout out to my sister who works in Wiltshire, and she's listening on the call. Hey, Leanna, I did say I'll give you a shout out, so I have to do that to just acknowledge my sister in the house. And I'm hoping that you're going to enjoy it. Let me just give you a little flavour of what's going to happen today. Rob and I are going to have a conversation. We are going to have a conversation about what we've discovered about Black Britons across the centuries in this country. And let me tell you, this is information I wish I knew when I was growing up, because for a very long time, I was told because of what I looked like, I couldn't possibly be British. And my goodness, my eyes have been opened. So I'm hoping that you enjoy the journey that we've discovered in researching and preparing for today. Rob, over to you to say a few words.
Cherron, thank you so much. So here we are, diving into yet another presentation. I find myself working alongside, I refer to her as a visionary. She's not always comfortable with that title, but my dear friend Cherron Inko-Tariah, who is a visionary, long before many of us have caught up with the importance of incredibly powerful staff networks, often shining the light into the darkness, shining the light into the darkness. I want to shout out to my dear friend Wally and my new friend William. They have prepared us for this moment. Wally, who had the idea about putting myself and Cherron together to do this presentation and then left it to us as regards the format. I've clicked the start button on our stopwatch. I know we've only got about 43 minutes left. The slides are now in place. And as Cherron says, you know, folks, thank you for plugging in. Thank you, everybody, for arresting your busy schedules. I'm going to hazard a guess that each of us could be somewhere else right now, but we've chosen to be here. Cherron and I both happen to walk in faith, so we believe the people who are supposed to be here are here, and we hope you enjoy what we've prepared. It's slightly different to what you might come across in Black History Month and presentations, because we're going to have a conversation between ourselves. You're listening in, of course, and if you listen well enough and if you listen intently enough, who knows, we may even give away a prize. Cherron?
Yeah, that's right. We have prizes, plural.
Oh,
prizes.
that's
Prizes.
I
Yeah.
thought it was one. We're
No,
going to give away more prizes.
we're going to give more than one prize. So you have to
We want-
listen intently in case there's a little quiz at the end, right? So let's pay attention. But Rob, we are here in Black History Month 2020. How did it all start? Talk us through what was going on.
It did, in fact, start in the United States in the 1920s when it was referred to as the Negro Week. That was the language of the day, Negro Week. But it got here to the UK and started in 1987, a year when the Bee Gees were #1 with You Win Again. I feel like breaking out into song. I won't, though. I won't. I promise you. I can't hold a note. I just smashed that stereotype. But winners of the FA Cup for footy fans amongst us that year was Coventry City. They beat Tottenham Hotspur in the final 3-2 with an own goal in extra time by that centre back who was played with diabetes. His name was Gary Mabbott. But this was a fantastic game. I won't go into that. I'm a footy fan. But it was also the year, and in fact, in the month of October, that we had what's known as the Great Storm. And that picture is depicting that. And it was in that month that we launched in the UK, Black History Month UK. It was set up by this man, Akiaba Ade Sebo, a Ghanaian, who would, speaking to his colleague at work at the Greater London Council, he discovered from a colleague that their son, by the name of Marcus, so named, by the way, after Marcus Messiah Garvey, had asked his mother, Marcus had asked his mother, "Can I be white?" is how the story goes. A very sad moment, a very serious moment, a very sober moment, because what this young 7-year-old had picked up at this early age was that it was better if he were white. He could see more people that were successful, that were white. He could hear stories that were from people who were white. It was a white existence for this young Marcus, who was a black boy, who was asking his mother the question. And Akiaba responded to that by trying to think, well, how could we shine a light on achievements, achievements from Black people, people from Africa who had now been part of a diaspora? How could we celebrate those lesser known facts? How could we celebrate the growing cultural diversity here in Britain, raising everyone's awareness? Now, October was chosen because it's significant in Africa, as it's a time of tolerance, reconciliation, and harvest. But Black History Month, let me say, as a personal view, and one I know that's growing across many people, is in fact for everyone. It's labeled Black History. It's said to be over a month. I've got issues with both of those. I think it's history, period, and I think it should be more than a month. But you know what? It's Black History Month. It's an opportunity. And I think of it in this way. It's a bit like a family reunion. We'd like to spend more time together. We'd like to be doing this all year round. But if this is the time we can do it, let's do it. And on the right, you see there what was the flyer for that very first meeting, Thursday, the 1st of October, 1987. You know, it was Marcus Messiah Garvey, the Jamaican, who said, a people without knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots. So have a look at some of these roots, colleagues. Have a look at some of these images on the screen. The fantastic and late Andrea Levy. She's the author of Small Island. She's standing next to, in this picture, Gary Young. Gary Young, one of our finest journalists, now a visiting professor at the University of Manchester. Next to him, holding his Oscar, the Oscar he won for 12 Years a Slave, is in fact Steve McQueen. He's got a series coming up on the BBC shortly. It's a series called collectively Small Acts, which is looking at the stories and contributions from people of the African diaspora here in Britain. If you look there, you'll see alongside Steve McQueen is in fact Olivette Otelli. She's the first Black woman historian professor. She's based at Bristol, and she's a first and lesser known, things that we don't spend much time talking about. Alongside Olivette, we've got in the top right hand corner, we've got Ottobah Gwagano. He was otherwise known as John Stewart, an abolitionist. He collected his and chronicled his experiences in a narrative that was to transform the abolitionist movement. In the bottom row, far left, you have the beautiful Olive Morris. Olive Morris was celebrated on the front page of Google search engine a couple of years ago. She was a community leader. She was from Jamaica. She died at the tender age of 27 from cancer. She was a campaigner for gender equality and race equality. More recently, of course, we have Idris Elba, often touted to be perhaps the first Black James Bond, but not only an actor, but also a screenwriter and a DJ when he's got any spare time. Alongside him, the fantastic and wonderful Dame Jocelyn Barrow. I had the pleasure of meeting Jocelyn on a number of occasions with some projects that had begun, and she was always and she had a presence anyway, but she was always overflowing with wisdom and insight and advice for the younger man and the younger woman to offer their very best in all that they did. And hiding on my screen anyway because of images in front, but I know available to you, will be Stormzy. All of these individuals have in common the compulsion, the motivation to offer their narrative, to speak their truth, to, as I heard said earlier, shine their light into an otherwise darkness. Keeping these facts about you, have a look at what we can celebrate through the centuries. Here we have just depictions. I don't know if you can, you know, Cherron, when we had this conversation, do you remember? We were talking about the things that could happen along the way.
Yeah.
You have John Blank over on the left-hand corner.
Yep, 16th century, there he is, John Blank. Tudor times, I believe that is. And people don't know. I never even heard of who John Blank was. You know, I had no clue
Yeah.
whatsoever. And when I discovered, I just felt really ignorant of my history. And
Yeah.
and that quote by Marcus Messiah Garvey really plays true. It
Yeah.
really does play true for me.
When you
And
look him up,
sorry?
when you look him up, he was paid 8 pence a day by King Henry VII, and he negotiated a pay increase. He doubled to 16 pence with Henry VIII. That's
Wow.
what it says. That's what
Wow.
it says.
Wow.
Go on, my brother. I challenge anyone to go into their workplace and get a double pay increase. Go for it. Go for it.
But
Rob,
let's look at the other image. Now, this is a painting by William Hogarth in the 1780 something. Everybody, look at this photo. Look closely and tell me what you see. Pay particular attention to what's happening on the left-hand side beneath the pub sign. What can you see there?
Cherron, that's a black guy.
Yeah.
And what's he doing?
Well, he's not being a butler.
No.
You know, he's not playing a traditional role, is he? He's there hugging somebody up, looking very comfortable indeed.
Cuddling up a friend. What are you saying, my man?
And then, and this is just. So obviously, this is Hogarth capturing something at that time. So there were black residents living in the United Kingdom in this century. And then we move on, as you just mentioned, we had people who were involved in the abolitionist movement that we haven't even heard about. You know, 16th, 17th, 18th century, we've had black people in the UK. And for many, many years, we were not aware of that. We assumed that most black people came in Windrush times. But they were here long before then, And then at the end there, you've got Arthur Wharton, who was deemed as Britain's first black footballer. You know, played for a number of clubs in the Northwest. Rob, sorry.
No, it's all good. It's all good, because when you look into Andrew Wharton a bit more, he played in two positions. He was a goalkeeper and he played in defence, for those who follow football. But that's, you know, the players on the pitch that stop the ball or try and prevent the ball from going into the net. But also, he was specifically the first professional black footballer. He actually got paid for playing. Unlike two of his predecessors, there was another guy before him, a Robert Walker, and before that, Andrew Watson, who's quite well known, but they were both amateurs. Robert Walker played for Scotland as well as a team in the Scottish League, but neither of them were paid to play. They were amateurs, much because a lot of the game was amateur at that time. But this guy, Arthur Wharton, was the first black professional footballer in the late 19th century.
So as we can see, there's been a rich contribution from, you know, black people in the United Kingdom for centuries. And let's move it on a bit. Let's move on. Let's talk about the years between 1900 and 1979. Yeah.
All right.
So,
come with
Rob,
that.
Okay. Who is this person? Do you know who this person is?
I have no idea. Who is that, Cherron?
So this is Britain's first black mayor.
Wow. Alan Glacier Minns.
Yes.
Let's get that name out there. Alan Glacier Minns.
Yeah, and he was the first black mayor, and in Thetford in Norfolk. And London didn't get its first black mayor until 1913.
Okay.
Yeah, which was John Richard Archer, and he was elected as London's first black mayor in Battersea.
Yeah, I've heard of the John Archer. I didn't know it was Richard. I heard of John Archer, definitely. And if you'd have asked me that on a quiz, I'd have answered John Archer as the first. But hearing of this guy earlier, Alan Glacier Minns, is really, really useful. Thank you. What you got next? Oh, well, the Windrush.
The Windrush. So in we're getting to the 40s, and then in 1948 we see the docking of Windrush at Tilbury Docks. But don't forget, we've just come off a World War II. Yeah,
Yeah.
so you had all these people who had fought for Queen and country, and then saw another opportunity to serve, and they jumped on board, and they came to the United Kingdom. So that was a joyous moment, but it was also
Yeah.
a painful one at the same time, because they came with lots of hopes and dreams, and obviously the reception that they got was rather painful on many,
Yeah.
many levels. So
Have
that
you
was
ever
in
been to Tilbury Dock, Cherron?
no.
I managed to get there, not last Black History Month, the one before, and they were doing, the NHS were doing a special trip out there, and you could, you know, for a nominal fee, just to cover the cost of getting down there, you could go on. And as part of Project Race at the time at Ministry of Justice, so we're talking 2 years ago, I joined a few NHS colleagues and we went down there. And I mention it only to say that when you get there, whilst obviously things have changed in terms of maintenance and so forth, they've actually kept it quite true to how it was. And there is something in the air. There is something in the air around the kind of hope and the kind of, you know, optimism upon arrival that many would have felt, that many would have been looking for. I mean, I know, speaking of my own dad, who wasn't quite of this time, but a little bit later, he came in 1958, bless his soul, he's now passed. But Dad literally believed that the streets were paved with gold. And I said, you know, many an argument I had with, I said, Dad, how stupid were you? He literally thought the campaign was streets paved with gold, right? He thought he could come and scoop the money up and just send it back home to Jamaica and then follow it when he'd collected enough. Over to you, Cherron.
Not alone in that, I'm sure. He's not alone.
Yeah.
So 40s, and then, you know, 50s come in, lots of things happening in the 50s. You know, we saw another first happening, or two firsts happening. Firstly, in 1954, we saw Billy Boston become the first black rugby league player. We saw Althea Gibson, who you can see pictured here, first black person to win Wimbledon, the first black person to win Wimbledon.
Okay, it would be before Arthur Ashe, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
It would.
Yeah.
Before Arthur, of course it would. Yeah.
But then after these two highs, so this was in 1957, and then in the 50s, we also had some painful moments. We had the Notting Hill riots in 1958. You know, the riots that took place because of this growing tension between Teddy boys and the black community, and the resentment over jobs and housing and so on. But then we also had the murder, the racist murder that still remains unsolved, of Kelso Cochrane, who was murdered in 1959. So we had the joyous moments then, but we also had some really painful times. And then, you know, that's in the 50s. We're now moving into a new decade, a new era, which was known as the swinging 60s.
Yeah.
And for all intents and purposes, if you'd arrived on the streets of Notting Hill in 1965, you would have been swept up in thinking, yeah, this is a carnival. It was the first time we've ever held an outdoor carnival. The carnival had started before, but it was the first time it was held outdoors in 1965. And then also we know that the Race Relations Act was coming in. And then it was amended again in 1968. And of course, we know that that was the spark of whose famous Rivers of Blood speech, Rob?
Well, is that going to be a quiz question, or should we just give it up?
Just give it up. Let's give it up.
I'll give it up. That was a gentleman by the name of Enoch Powell. He delivered a speech that was to bring fresh, deeper attention to the racial tension by using words such as swamp and you know, overtaken by, and if we're not very careful, he said, this land will be taken over by a people that were merely invited to help rebuild the country. Just to mention really quickly, Cherron, that 65 Act, later amended in 68, was actually informed by the 1963 Bristol bus boycott. A lot of people, if you say bus boycott, civil rights, they'll talk of Rosa Parks in the 1954 to 55 in Montgomery.
But we had our own, didn't we?
Had our own right here in the UK, in Bristol. A guy called Paul Stevenson instigated as part of a group, a network. There's that word again, network. But he got together and actually campaigned for improved terms and conditions and rights of workers on the buses, and he in fact informed the 1965 Act. Absolutely fascinating stuff.
So again, on that's, it's through protest, whether it's taking a knee, whether it's making, walking in the streets with a march, whether it's some sort of stand. We've seen throughout history how we've utilized those painful moments that we've gone through to really bring a change. Rob's just alluded to the Bristol boycott that led to legislation, and other things have happened that led to legislation again. And so those painful moments has made it less painful for others down the line. And that's something we need to be mindful of and remind ourselves. And of course, the other wonderful thing that happened in the 60s was that our very own Rob Neal was born. So that was a joyous moment for the entire world, clearly. But let's move on. Let's move on.
From statues to statutes. From statues, statutes. Let's do that.
Let's do that. So I don't know about many of you, but I remember in the 70s when I was a very young child, watching News at 10 and seeing Trevor McDonald. I was like, that's the time when you gather all your family around and say, there's a black person on TV. It was one of those moments. And another one of those moments that happened for me when I was, again, in the 70s was when Roots was first shown on TV. I don't know if you know where you were when Roots was on, but I think every black person in the United Kingdom was in front of their TV on a Sunday night watching Roots. And I remember this sense of anger that rose up. I went to school the next day and I refused to talk to any of my white friends. And I said, your family, chopped off Kunta Kinte's foot, and you did this and you did that. And I was angry. I was very angry. And I wish I'd known about it before. Rob, what about you?
No, I share in that anger, Cherron. Wherever we were, respectively, we were feeling the same thing. We share the same heartbeat. We share the same journey. We share the same common experience. When I watched Roots, I too was left feeling very, very angry indeed. And I remember as I watched it, my anger just got deeper and deeper as I appreciated in a new way just how much of a engineered process the enslavement of Africans was. How for over 400 years this system had enabled the dominant people, the dominant culture, to take control over other people's lives and reduce those people to less than human being. And I remember feeling that anger too. I remember feeling very distant from what up until that point had been my white friends, but really thinking, how do I get past this point? It was a real serious moment. And to this day, do you know, Cherron, to this day, unless recent events have overtaken, but that miniseries, the Roots miniseries, is still recorded as the most watched miniseries in US television history.
Wow, I can believe that. I really can. It was powerful. And then in spite of all of that, so let's look at what's happening. You've got a group of people who are hearing from the first time about just a part of their history. They're angry, they're dealing with all the emotions, and yet you still got people, adults, who are striving to create a better Britain for the same generation that's coming up. People like Lord David Pitt, who you can see there, a live peer, who has been, he was quoted as one of the most longest serving and passionate parliamentarians the UK has ever had. So he knew all of this stuff, but yet he was still going forward trying to make it better so that our anger didn't have to continue. So it's thinking about the people who know these things, but they're still saying, I need to do more because I'm thinking legacy. I'm thinking about the next generation coming through. And that's really, I take comfort from that. I take encouragement. I take inspiration from that, because, it's easy for us to just sit still and be angry and not do anything with that. But it takes greater courage and strength to say, I am angry. Now I know what I know. I'm going to still do something to make it better. And Lord, obviously he's passed away, and I'm grateful to him and to others, other things that's happened, the people behind the Rock Against Racism Carnival, young people are rising up again, black and white, coming together again to say, we're not standing for this. We want to do something different. And then, of course, we had Maggie Thatcher, the milk snatcher, in inverted commas, who was elected in 1978.
Well, we'll leave anyone who's listening to this to decide whether that was joy or pain.
Yes, we will do. We will do. I'm going to hold my opinion. And of course, we had another first with Viv Anderson.
Yes.
Becomes the first black footballer to play for England's senior men's team in 1978. So that was another joyous moment.
That was. It came at a time where I think Laurie Cunningham played for the under 23s or under 21s months before. But Viv Anderson against Czechoslovakia played as the first black player at full senior level. Brilliant stuff. We're just past halfway, Cherron. So let's crack next.
So we leave 1979 or 1978 on a high. And then, of course, we enter the 80s, you know. And one of the first things we see in the 80s, of course, is another tragedy. So we see, we seem to be taking steps forward, and then something happens to knock us back. And we've had the new crossfire in 1981. People aged between, 14 and 22. 13 people who could have been going to my school, who I could have known. They were in that age group, and they died in that terrible fire.
There's a great look at that by Akala in his book Natives. If you haven't read that, check out Akala and Natives. There's a great chronicle of what he was going through when that happened. Yeah. Thanks, George.
And then following that, we've got, unfortunately, what is that great quote? The riots are the voice of the unheard.
Yeah.
And so we had the Brixton Toxteth riots in 1981, which gave us the Scarman report, which saw the sus laws repealed. We then had the Brixton riots because of the shooting of Cherry Gross by the police. And then we had the Broadwater Farm riots, which some members of my family were directly affected. And that was because of the death of Cynthia Jarrett in 1985. So there were some painful moments, but this was the time when a lot of black communities said that they had enough. No one was listening, nothing was changing, and things were getting worse. And then in 1987, we had some rays of sunshine, 4 rays of sunshine actually shine through in the political sphere. We had 4 MPs from black and Asian backgrounds. Regardless of what you think of these MPs now, the fact that despite everything that had been happening, they still decided, like Lord Pitt, that they wanted to make a change in the way that they knew best. And they entered Parliament. And, Tottenham erupted when Bernie Grant became the MP. You had Diane Abbott for Hackney, Keith Vaz, and Paul Boateng.
Yeah. Brilliant. I do remember that.
Yeah. And then, of course, in 1987, you had Black History Month. Rob, why don't you talk us through the 90s? Because the 90s was a big game changer for many of us, for many reasons.
Well, in 93, I think it was April 93, Stephen Lawrence lost his life, and he was killed for one reason and one reason alone, because of the color of his skin. It led to an extensive report. I've actually got a copy of it, actually. As part of my work when I was doing Project Race, I went through and looked at the 70 recommendations that this report gave to the Metropolitan Police. They looked into the investigation into Stephen's murder, and they found a series of evidence that showed the police to be, as William McPherson puts it, institutionally racist. It was a new term to the UK, new language, a new kind of pain for many of us. But in fact, the term comes from the late 60s in America, and a gentleman by the name of Stokely Carmichael, who introduced the term, and Stokely did work with the Black Panther movement. But in this report, it talks about some of the incompetence by those that were assigned to investigating Stephen's murder, and what it hung on in the end, and what it gave as conclusive evidence are, beyond the canteen culture and the banter and the kind of stuff that you do hear spoken about even today by I'll grab another book off my shelf, but Leroy Logan in his book Closing Ranks, my life as a cop. Leroy served for 30 years in the police. Leroy gave evidence at the Stephen Lawrence inquiry. There's a real connection there between the two. But what Leroy talks about, and what's evidenced in this report, Cherron, is that in the end, the assigned officers pursued the only eyewitness to this tragedy, a young man by the name of Dwayne Brooks. And the only reason they pursued Dwayne was because they made an assumption that fatality plus knife plus black person must be the black person that did that deed. And even though they were furnished with the 6 names of the individuals that were almost certainly responsible for Stephen's murder, in fact 2 of them are serving time at Her Majesty's pleasure right now, they decided to look the other way and pursue Dwayne, who was later, by the way, elected as a councillor. So moving along to the noughties, you've got to remember this kind of sets the trend of a lot of what took place during the 90s. So you know, it was part of the prevailing feeling and environment that was created, the kind of atmosphere that we had and felt. We had Baroness Amos, who was, I believe, our first elected member of a British cabinet, a first black woman to make her way onto a black cabinet. And then further along, we've got the award-winning, is it Mallory? Mallory's up next, I think, Mallory Blackman, the award-winning author of that wonderful series of tales known as Noughts and Crosses. If you've not read, please tuck in. It's now, of course, been adapted and made into a play. It's also been adapted and dramatized as a TV drama featuring notable actors on there. In fact, Stormzy makes an appearance in the televised adaptation. But Mallory Black, sorry, yeah, go for it. Yeah,
I was just going to say, and don't forget, in 2000, so don't forget, in the UK, when we've just had the first 2 cabinet ministers appointed, the USA was having its first black president appointed. And so, you know, when Barack Obama actually came to number 10 in 2008, I remember we all felt that, I don't know, I just thought we all felt it was wonderful, like, you know, could this be a sign of what's to come? A black man entering the gates of number 10. You know, so it gave, again, some more hope. And coming back to the 2010, it was in 2018 that a DNA analysis of a skeleton was found in Cheddar Gorge, which suggests that the first modern Britons had dark brown skin. And I know that caused an uproar, you know, so a lot of people were smiling, a lot of people were confused. I was one who was smiling, obviously. And that brings us to where we are today, Rob, doesn't it? To where we are today.
Where we are today, and it's a nice link as well with the geography. Here we are presenting for our colleagues in Wiltshire, and you mentioned Cheddar Gorge. I think also where we are today is an unprecedented year. I think all of us can reach for that word quite readily. Yeah. I'm nearly 4 decades in the civil service, and I've never known a year like it ever. I'm 57 at my next birthday, if by God's grace I get there, which is May of next year. And I have to say, I have never known a year like this. We're halfway through October, and I've never, ever known a year like this. I refer to it, Cherron, you know, as a perfect storm. I think when we talk of joy and pain, we talk of what's possible and what hurts us at times. They're all in play at the same time. The tragedy, the public lynching of George Floyd, you know, we are all indelibly marked with 8 minutes and 46 seconds, knee on his neck. Even as he cried and asked for his mother, the officer kept the knee on the neck. Disproportionate, I think we'd all agree, especially when you discover that he was apprehended over an alleged counterfeit $20 check. Alleged.
Yeah.
But coupled with that, you know, you've got COVID-19, Cherron. You know, 2 public reports now, 2 published reports established clearly with empirical evidence that this is a pandemic that, whilst it affects us all, and it does, it disproportionately impacts on Black, Asian and minority ethnic people. And so we have a further impetus. There is an additional injunction for us to do something about the lived experience of Black, Asian and minority ethnic people.
Yeah.
Because let us not forget, George Floyd is not an American phenomenon. We've talked about Stephen Lawrence on this presentation and this conversation, but we've got others. You've mentioned Kelsey Cochran, but there are others, Mark Duggan, Roland Adams, Joy Gardner, Roger Sylvester, Dalian Atkinson,
Damiana Taylor.
Taylor.
But here's the key thing, though. Here's the thing, because we have to, the challenge that many of us have had is that we need to understand that we have been a dispersed people, right? We have been dispersed. That's the meaning of diaspora, the dispersion of any people from their original homeland. And that's the thing we have been struggling with, because, you know, we were robbed of our sense of history. We were robbed of some cultural aspects. They changed our names, changed our language. So there was a big disconnect. But I want us to challenge that, because I want us to see, you know, on the screen, you can see different dots, right, Rob? So this could be us working in the UK. This could be us working in an organization. This could be us working across the world. And we may have been dispersed over the entire globe. We may have been displaced. But to get to the point where we need to do something together, what we can learn from history is that no matter where we have been, there is power in connection. There is power in uniting with others. So we may be dispersed, but we don't have to be disconnected. There is power in our unity. There is strength in our unity. And so with that, Rob, in the last few minutes that we've got, how can we take this forward? What message can we send out to those listening about moving forward together, remembering now we know who we are, now we know the contribution that we can make. What's next? What's the future hold? How do we go from pain to provocation?
Well, firstly, let me acknowledge and say I love what you've just shared, Cherron. I love that you talk about through the pain, taking with us the joys, that we are in a position that we can do something about what comes next, that we have an opportunity, that this is an opportunity. I think that whilst we may be scattered, we're not separate. We're not separated. Here we are in a 2D world right now for most of our working life, and yet we are able to connect with, I think Matt was saying earlier, over 200 people, but we've got a number of people listening to some of these messages. So we might be physically distant, but we're socially connected. That's what we need to embrace and engage with. You know, our proximity to power now is like never before. You know, Cherron, you and I have been able to connect with others and build not just products and offer services, but also exercise and give your visionary skills a real playground to offer what comes next. You've developed the National Day for Staff Networks that takes place, is it the second Wednesday of every May? And the date for that event has already been set for next year. You know, you did it virtually this year because of the circumstances. You'll do whatever you need to do next year as you bring your team together to deliver that. We've heard the amazing power, the incredible power that there is through staff networks and connectivity. And we've all now got this kind of sight of the ecosystem. We can look at what, you know, some of us on this call may be expert in stakeholder mapping. Some of us may be expert in program or project management, but we can connect, whether it be through LinkedIn or through Twitter or through other forms of social media. Yes, we need to regulate our time on that, but we also can use it to connect and do what needs to come next. So through the joy and the pain, the joy that fuels our tank, the pain that builds our resilience, we have an opportunity to do the next best thing. We can all be history makers. We can all add to the history of what comes next. I love what Mayor Angelou has to say about this, Cherron, and you captured it with grabbing this quote. I can be changed by what happens to me, but I refuse to be reduced by it. So as we close out, and I think we've got about 5 minutes of our allocated time, Cherron, I want to start rolling the drums on this quiz because you said multiple prizes. I thought it was only one prize, but over to you, because trust me, colleagues, I don't know what's coming next.
Well, I'm going to close with this slide here, because on the screen you're going to see lots and lots of people. Some you may recognize and some you don't recognize. And I've included your speakers of today because we are all making history in our own unique way. And my challenge to you is, how are you going to make history in your own unique way? And so here's a quiz question, and here's a quiz question. We've mentioned it in the chat, in the talk today, but I want to see who was really paying attention. In 1954, what was the name of the first person to become the Black Rugby League player to represent Great Britain? I did say his name. So
how we decide the winner, Cherron? Is it the first
well,
person to put it in?
First person to put it in the chat,
Or come off your mic.
or you can come off your mic if that's easier. But you know,
can I ask and give away a prize, Cherron, or have you got a way you're going to do the rest of it?
Go and do the other one. You can do the other one.
Yeah. All right. So we haven't got any winners on your one yet.
I know. They're all Googling. Stop Googling. You're not allowed to Google.
What was your prize, Cherron?
My prize was a copy of the Power of Staff Networks.
Yay! Now that's a good prize, folks. I've got my own copy and no one's getting this. This is dog-eared. I've got this all marked up. But honestly.
What's your question, Rob?
All right, my question is this. Well, can I say what the prize is first?
Yes.
The prize, everybody, is a copy of the just published 100 Great Black Britons. Hours of fun going through 100 great. This book I'm going to give to whoever gets the answer to this question. It's a tricky one. Listen closely, and it wasn't mentioned earlier. The question is, who was the first British solo artist to go to #1 in the music charts in both the UK and America with their debut album? Who was the first British solo artist to go, everyone's Googling now, to go to #1 in the UK and the British charts with their debut album?
And mine again was, who was the first Black Rugby League player to represent Great Britain? And on those points, we're going to close because I'm conscious of time is spent. But we hope you've enjoyed our journey through multicultural Britain and through the centuries. And if you have any questions, by all means, put them in the chat. On behalf of, well, Rob can say his farewell, but I'm going to say farewell. Thank you for listening. Rob?
Well, thank you for listening. Thank you, Cherron, for involving me. Thank you, Wally and William, for all of your work beneath the waterline. Absolutely big up your efforts and all that you do there at Wiltshire. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Keir. Thank you, everyone on the call. Thanks for having me. And stay well, stay safe, and stay strong.
Over to you, Matt.
Thank you, Cherron and Rob. That was phenomenal. It's interesting. I was scribbling notes away there as we get into the various questions that people have asked. And as soon as you mentioned the Coventry versus Tottenham final, I had a flashback to my 9-year-old experience of that. That's the first football cup final I can remember. I'm sure I should have been able to remember stuff at 9 years old or before that, but that one sticks in my memory as my uncle was a Coventry fan, and I said I was supporting Tottenham for the day, and he dangled me upside down. So that kind of a slight scarred experience from that one. But even to this day,
it's a great final.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because even now, kind of some 30 odd years on, I can still remember the likes of Cyril Regis, kind of an icon of black football. But even the likes of Lloyd McGrath, who gave Glenn Hoddle a massive run for his money that day. Kind of Glenn Hoddle in the prime of his English career at that point. I'm conscious we haven't got too much time, but there are a flood of questions that come in. But there were just a couple of things that sprung to mind. I'll kickstart with one of them. Cherron, you so appropriately described it as stepping forward and stepping backwards, that transition from kind of the vast history we've got, and then into the 80s and kind of some progress being made, and then into the 90s and kind of feeling like it was a step backwards. It reminded me of a quote by Barack Obama when he left office in 2016, and he said, "Life zigs and zags in multiple directions."
That's right.
but you have to step back from time and look at the bigger picture and see that we are moving in the right direction. But particularly this year, with all the events surrounding George Floyd, we're now in a digital age where things are streamed kind of instantly. And I remember seeing a flood of very emotional, very personal responses from people talking into kind of FaceTime, that kind of stuff. And one of the overriding messages was, "I'm tired." You know, people just expressing repeatedly, "I'm tired, I'm tired, I'm tired." And your history that you just kind of so beautifully portrayed expresses very much the ongoing fight and narrative that's been going on. What are your perspectives, your thoughts on kind of staying resilient? I'm minded Keir touched on Colin Kaepernick 4 years ago. He took the knee, and still now we're taking the knee, and very much kind of it's moved forward, but has it really moved forward? How do you stay resilient? How do you stay tenacious in keeping with this narrative and seeing the bigger picture? Cherron, if I come to you first on that one, perhaps.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a good question. I think one question I keep asking myself is, if I stop doing what I'm doing, am I making it better or am I making it worse? And what's the impact of that? And I think sometimes, I relate to people who feel tired. You can feel tired, but that's why I believe so strongly in the power of connecting with others, because when one feels tired, the other can lift each other up. I'm going to give you an analogy. Forgive me, and I don't mean to sound like a real sad person, but if you study geese, when they're flying, they go in a V formation. They do that so that when the person at the front is tired, someone can just immediately come in and take over. And they keep doing that because they understand that they've got a long journey to go, but they understand the importance of supporting each other. And I guess with me, I surround myself with people who I know is going to be able to take over for a little while I recuperate, while I recover, while I re-energize. And the reason why I love the quote by Marcus Garvey is that I can look back in history and draw strength from them, because I am much further forward than they were. And, I have so much to hand than they did, and they kept going. So what, for me, it's like, really, Cherron, pull yourself up. Let's do this. But I do acknowledge that people are tired. So I guess it's learning from my past, understanding my purpose in life, drawing with others who can support me, and who I can support, and just thinking about what we are trying to do. Just like Lord Pitt was thinking about the next generation, I'm thinking about the next generation. So those are the type of things that I keep focused on. And there's a great quote by, I think it's James Baldwin, but I always think it's Angela Davis, but Rob says it's James Baldwin, and it's the one about, I can no longer, the one about accepting things you can't change, or nothing that is faced. Help me out, Rob. You know the quote I'm talking about.
You're actually right on both counts, because I think you're conflating two quotes.
I am conflating two quotes.
James Baldwin is, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. That's James Baldwin. And then the Angela Davis one is that she's no longer spending time on things she cannot change. She's now concentrating on the things that she can. That's Angela Davis. So
those things I'll keep. So that's a very long answer, but I don't think it's something I can give a concise answer on. But yes, that's how I keep my resilience up.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. Thank you. Rob, perhaps if I could come to you next. We've talked about kind of looking backwards in that resilience. 2020 has proven to be a very challenging year for a whole manner of reasons. Where do you think the narrative is going to go in 2021? What are your predictions for kind of how race, equality, diversity, inclusion, and I guess I look broader than race, kind of the whole narrative around inclusion in general. What are your thoughts on what the landscape looks like for this going forward?
Thank you for that, Matt. Well, let me start by saying I agree with everything Cherron just said. She could have been speaking for me. I kind of sum it up by, for me, resilience is my faith. I am nothing without a living God, and yet through God everything is possible, and I lean on that at times that I wouldn't even want to have to describe. And the second thing is my friends. I am blessed, truly blessed, with a group of friends around me that I love, and they love me back for who I am, for who I am. But in terms of predictions, and I'm not great at predictions, actually, Matt, I thought Tottenham would beat Coventry back in '87. I think they were hot favourites. And we had just, we being Queen's Park Rangers Football Club, had recently sold on Clive Allen via Arsenal to Tottenham. And when he scored in 2 minutes, we thought the writing was on the wall. But what a great game it was. And sorry you lost out on that day. But I think what's going to happen now is we're going to have a more sensible and a more genuine attention to staff networks like never before. Staff networks have always been precious. They've always been, they've always had the potential to act as the conscience of organizations. Some people, a couple of people in this call right now had the vision about that, and they wrote books about it, and they could see the incredible power of staff networks. And yes, I am talking about my dear friend Cherron. But I think alongside the attention to staff networks, which is critical, because who feels it knows it. Who feels it knows it. And staff networks nearly always emerge from a lack of and within that organization. So their proximity to the answers and what really matters is essential to an organization. And the clever leaders, Matt, the clever leaders have cottoned on to that. They've actually seen that, hang on a minute, these networks have got something. If I invest in this staff network, we can actually make Wiltshire Council a better place. Now, what's going to happen alongside that, in my view, my humble opinion, is you're going to see an increased clamoring, an increased desire to increase our own cultural intelligence. Every one of us is on a journey in improving our cultural intelligence, not cultural competence, not cultural conscience, slightly different things. I'm talking about cultural intelligence, CQ, because we've evolved. We've moved from IQ and taking IQ with us. We've moved to EQ, emotional intelligence, what the heart has to say, and taking both of those with us, we're now stepping into cultural intelligence. And we know that if we're going to deliver on equalities, we have to get under the skin of bias. And if we get under the skin of bias, we truly can make the future a more equitable one. Not equal. That equality is a good thing, but it's only a step in the right direction. We must become more equitable, because not all of us start from the same place. And cultural intelligence insists that we appreciate that. That's why I think CQ is going to be huge in 2021.
That's fascinating, and it's so important in this modern era to be able to categorize things, label things, break things down into such a simple language for people to understand and engage with. It's interesting you talked, Rob, about the importance of friendship. It links to kind of Cherron, what you were saying, and your metaphor about geese. It's interesting. I was minded when you used that analogy around I read something myself on geese where if a goose is injured on flight, it won't just fly down to the ground on its own. Two of its members will escort it down and stay with it until it can fly back and catch everyone back up, which kind of is this whole power of staff networks. Exactly what you're just saying, Rob. Cherron, if I could possibly come to you, we had a question from somebody in the audience today that said, what is the most important thing that leaders can do to support staff networks? We've got a lot of people that are part of staff networks, but what in your mind can we be doing as leaders to support this activity?
Okay, so I think what leaders can do is, I think leaders should ask themselves a question. If they truly believe in the power of networks, if they truly understand that they can contribute to the productivity, delivery of services, the culture change that's required in the organization, the question that you ask yourself is, what needs to be in place to ensure that this is the most successful venture in this organization? Now, that could mean that they need the time, they need to build their capacity, they need some agency, they need some finances, whatever it is you would do for any team in an organization. So if you start in a project team, you think about who's in there, you think about, do they have the right competencies, how do you support them, who's their mentors, what finance, what cost code should we give them, all of the stuff that you would need to sort of help ensure that a team is successful in delivering on a KPI is the same that's required for your network. It's the same. If anything, it's more important, because this is about dealing with matters of the heart as well as the head. And so it's about thinking through what problem are they fixing and what is it we need to make sure that the environment is ready to help them fix that in an autonomous way, where we are listening, where we are open. So we have to ensure that the environment's ready. We have to ensure that the message from the of support from the top all the way through to the middle managers, all the way through to every person in a decision-making role, understands the importance of networks. It's not a group of people huddled together at lunchtime in the basement with cold sandwiches and warm tea, moaning about how bad it is. It's a group of people who are potentially your next cohort of inclusive leaders, who are articulating a lived experience that is adverse to them because of who they are, what they look like, or their background. And if you are a savvy CEO, if you are a savvy leader, you surely want the best for your staff and from your staff. And if networks are able to say, hey, here are some gaps, we've spotted these gaps, they are the cheapest smoke alarm you can install, but just make sure that some of your colleagues aren't removing their batteries. So that's what I would say. Create an environment where they not just survive, but they actually thrive, and they can be an amplified voice and really harness the power that they can help with the organization.
It's brilliant, thank you. And it links so beautifully to what Rob was saying a minute about cultural intelligence and working on cultural intelligence and embedding that, enlightening people. Rob, if I can come to you with one final question, just to kind of acknowledge the quiz questions as well. Maddie Ball is the correct answer to the question about the rugby league player, and Casey came back with, is it James Peters was the first to break America and the UK? The answer to Rob's question. James Peters seemed to be Peterson, was it? Was a very popular answer, but Casey got in there extremely quick. Rob, final question to you in the last minute. We've got an incredible amount of students that work that are looking to get into social work following us today on the call. And one of the questions that's been asked is, what advice would you give for these students looking to get into social work? Kind of what would your thoughts be?
I mean, it would depend on what sort of ages we're talking about, but there's all sorts of routes in where you can get some lived experience, some on-the-job experience, and I always recommend getting experience. I'm a father. I've got 2 children now, both young adults. My daughter is 27 and is now a solicitor into her 3rd year as a solicitor, and I recall when she was doing her law degree at Southampton, I was able to arrange for her to get some work experience at the Supreme Court for UK with a dear friend of mine there, Chris Mail, who runs the HR function. I was also able to get her to sit alongside members of the National Black Crown Prosecution Association, the Black Staff Network in the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service. So she got an insight into what it was like to be an advocate, what it was like to work in law. And it more than whetted her appetite. It affirmed for her that that's what she wanted to do with her working career. And indeed, we sit here today with her having graduated and started life as a solicitor. My son is studying maths at Essex University, and he hasn't yet worked out what he wants to do with whatever he has to offer. But I do know that he, as part of his graduation from Duke of Edinburgh, as part of his work as a team leader at Duke of Edinburgh, he's got a 2 week of work coming up on that. He is also following that same path of getting experience early on. So connect with, whether it be government departments that offer social work activity. There's a number of departments that do that, but working particularly around the 3rd sector and the voluntary sector. There'll be lots of organisations that will welcome willing hands to help out with some of the work that needs doing there. Of course, when you're doing that, the pay may not be great, but it's not always about pounds and pence. Sometimes the greatest pay that you can ever receive is the experience of doing a job you might not otherwise get to do. So I would say tuck in, get some working experience, work out if that's what you really want to do, because later on, when push comes to shove and you get the joy and the pain of that journey in employment, you're going to want to really follow your passion and do what you started out wanting to do in the first place.
That's excellent. I'm conscious we've stolen a couple more minutes of your time, both of you. So thank you again from the bottom of our hearts for your impassioned education of the last however long it's phenomenal to be able to get that insight and understanding of things, but also to have this opportunity at the end to ask a few questions, both of my own and from that of the audience. Cherron, Rob, thank you so much for spending this last hour with us.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye for now.